Hello class. So this week we are looking at the rise of Islam. Now this is going to be an important section of our book, considering that we live in Morocco. This is chapter 10, section 1. Looking at our objectives for this chapter, we have 3 objectives to be exact. So our first one is describe Arabia before Islam. Second, explain how Muhammad began to unify the Arabian Peninsula under Islam. And number 3, identify Islamic beliefs and practices. When we start talking about Islam, we're looking at this peninsula here. This is today modern-day Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Oman, UAE, but back then it's just called Arabian Peninsula. So this is where Islam starts. There are many people called Bedouins. Now Bedouins, they are a nomadic people group. Here's sort of an example of this nomadic people group, the Bedouins. They're sort of known as nomads of the desert. By 600, Arabia is already connected through trade. So they are already starting to trade with different cultures, probably in Europe as well as Asia, or Asia Minor. Mecca, this is the major city in this peninsula. They are known as the largest trading city. So we have lots of different people traveling to Mecca to visit the Kaaba, which at this time is a pagan temple. Right now, we think of the Kaaba as something else, but it's important to know that it started out as sort of pagan worship. The concept of Allah, a single God, was already known in Arabic. So we already have this idea of monotheism, which means the belief in one God, is already prevalent in this culture. Here we have is the Kaaba. Now, I'm sure many of you already know what the Kaaba is. It's a very sacred place for Muslims who have to make a pilgrimage to Mecca. But it's also important to note that through history, this is actually originally the place of a pagan temple. That, of course, changes over time when we have the Prophet Muhammad rising up. Here's also some ancient picture or documentation. Again, we have people venturing to the Kaaba for worship. Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam. So Muhammad, he is born in a powerful clan. He's also known as being a shepherd, and he's sort of the leader of many caravans. At a very young age, he becomes a trader. And it's important to know that he marries a woman named Khadija. These are just some of the facts that we know about him before he ends up rising up to the status of prophet. So Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad at a very young age is interested in religion, and he starts to meditate in the hills where the angel Gabriel comes to him. And as Gabriel sort of reports to him that he was the last prophet of Allah. So Muhammad is accredited as beginning the religion of Islam. The Arabic word for Islam means to submit to God, which I'm sure all of you already know since most of you speak Arabic. Some of Muhammad's first followers of this sort of newfound religion, Islam, are people like his wife Khadija, as well as some of the traders that he would trade with, or his friends. Eventually, we also see Muhammad starting to preach about Allah and Islam in Mecca. But this doesn't go over very well at first. A lot of people who are living in the Arabian Peninsula and in Mecca were afraid that if everyone accepted this new monotheistic idea, that Mecca was not going to be as powerful as a place of pilgrimage for both trade and different religions. So what ends up happening is some of Muhammad's followers are attacked. In 1622, Muhammad decides to leave Mecca because of these attacks that are happening. And he goes to a smaller town about 200 miles away in the north called Yathrib. This migration north to the city is a special pilgrimage now called Hijra. I'm probably mispronouncing it. You can correct me in class. This shift of going to Yathrib sort of marks a new positive part in Muhammad being a prophet. In Yathrib, Muhammad is sort of becomes the political, military, and religious leader of the city. And with that means that he has a lot of influence on what people are going to be worshiping. And therefore, a lot of people in this city, they end up converting to Islam. About 8 years later, we see that Muhammad comes back to Mecca. And at this point, he has quite a few followers. And they are able to go into the Kaaba and destroy all the idols that are there. Remember, the Kaaba at this point is not an Islamic center yet. It is still a pagan temple. After this happens, we have many people in Mecca, they also start to convert to Islam as well. After the idols are destroyed in the Kaaba, and many of these Meccans, they start to convert, they become a part of a community of Muslims called an Ummahs. We have Muhammad dying in about 1632. But by the time of Muhammad's death, we have most of the Arabian Peninsula has now been converted to Islam. So within his lifetime, we have the rise and start of Islam. Now we're going to look at a few of the beliefs and practices of Islam. So Islam is a monotheistic religion. What that means is that there is only one God, and that God is Allah. There also is very strict rules on the differentiation between good and evil. We also see that people have a responsibility for their actions, and this is sort of known as the duties or the 5 pillars of Islam. We're going to break down these 5 pillars. So pillar number 1 is the declaration of faith. So there is no God but Allah. Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. So Muslims, when they are praying, they often say this. So this is declaring what their faith is, who their God is, and who is their prophet. Our second pillar is looking at daily prayer. Now, being in Morocco, we're all familiar with the 5 times a day that Muslims are supposed to pray. Oftentimes, there's the call to prayer from mosques all around the city. When Muslims pray, they should be facing Mecca, they should be on a prayer mat, and oftentimes people will even wash their feet before they pray. There's also a fixed amount of movements when people are praying to Mecca. That includes kneeling, putting your forehead on the ground, and this prayer is usually expressing the fact that you are a servant of Allah. Our third pillar is alms for the poor. What this means is that each Muslim is supposed to give some of their money to charity to help poor. In this way, they believe that their wealth is made pure. So if you are making a certain amount of money in Islamic country, you should be giving some of that money to the poor. Number 4, fasting during Ramadan. So again, we have a special celebration, Ramadan. Muslim people cannot eat for the month of Ramadan during the daylight hours. Our last pillar is a pilgrimage to Mecca. Now, you're supposed to do this at least once in your life if you can afford it. Of course, not every person can afford it. So here we have is that Kaaba, that used to be a pagan temple, but is now one of the most sacred places of Islam. Continuing on looking at some of the practices of Islam. So those 5 pillars, those are sort of the most important duties that Muslims are supposed to follow. And that's supposed to build community within Muslim countries. Okay? But we also see a lot of Muslims do not drink alcohol or eat pork. And that is something that I have found true with some of my Muslim friends here in Morocco. Okay? We also see worship on Fridays. There are no priests or religious hierarchies, but we do have scholars who are called ulama. Muhammad's followers end up memorize a lot of things that Muhammad said to them. So after he dies, we see that many of the things that Muhammad had said were written down into a book called the Quran. Muslims only consider the Arabic word for Quran to be used to be the word of Allah. Okay? So basically, the book of the Quran is from the word of Allah himself. And this is, of course, done in Arabic. Sunnah is sort of a word used for the best model of proper living. So basically living by Muhammad's example. So people look to Muhammad and try to live like Muhammad. The Sunnah and the Quran were both used to create a body of law called Sharia law. This is sort of known as an Islamic law system. This regulates anything from moral conduct, family life, how to deal with problems of the family, business, government, and community life. And this is a religious law that many countries use in legal situations. The last thing we're going to talk about is the connection of Islam to other religions. So Muslims believe that God had sent other prophets. We have Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. Now these prophets are also important in the religions of Judaism and Christianity. And it's believed that these three religions are connected to each other. The difference is that many Jews and many Christians do not believe that Muhammad is the last prophet, whereas Muslims do. They also believe that Muhammad is the greatest prophet. So Jews and Christians, they're still seen as people of the book. And oftentimes back then, we see a lot of religious tolerance for both Jews and Christians. Your question that you need to answer with this video is I want you to discuss Mecca, where it is located, and why it is important to Muslims. I also want you to tell me about the Kaaba and describe what it looks like.